Hey guys, how's it going? It's Andy from Magoo Investing. Happy Friday. So before we get started, I do want to say that I have finally gotten my new planner for this year, and my goal is to try to be more organized and plan out these videos. A lot of days I wake up in the morning and I haven't really planned out what I want to do for the video, and as a result, I miss a lot of days that I planned on uploading. So if there's any topics or specific stocks you guys would like me to go over in future episodes, be sure to leave them in the comment section down below because I will add them to my planner and I'll actually get to them sooner rather than later instead of waking up in the morning and not really sure what I want to do with each individual video. So this week has been wild for a bunch of reasons, but I'm only going to be focusing on the stock market aspects of that. Some of the most interesting news came from Elon Musk becoming the richest person in the world and having a higher net worth than ExxonMobil, which is just fascinating to think about considering Exxon was one of the most well-respected and largest companies like 2 decades ago. Boeing got fined $2.5 billion for their 737 MAX plane crashes, and Plug Power, ticker symbol PLUG, jumped 30% after a South Korean investment firm invested $1.5 billion into the company. So that had a huge move to the upside. But the most interesting news for me personally has come with the Chinese government versus Alibaba and Jack Ma. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about what's been going on with Chinese stocks because a lot has happened in the past month. Maybe even more than that, maybe like the past 2 months. It has really changed my view on investing in Chinese stocks. So today I'm going to be talking about what's happened with them, and then I'm going to be ranking my favorite Chinese stocks overall because even though my views may be slightly different than a lot of people's, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are looking to invest in Chinese stocks, so I do want to rank them and give my reasoning for why I like or dislike each of them. Also, just a reminder, there are timestamps in the description of every video if you'd like to jump around. Before getting started, I do have to say that I'm not a licensed financial advisor and this is not financial advice. Anything you hear in this video is just me giving my own opinions on the stock market, and you need to do your own research before making any investment decisions. Also, if you've been enjoying these videos, really appreciate it. Hit that like and subscribe button, as it would help my channel out a lot. So this year has definitely been a whirlwind for Chinese stocks. First, we had Luckin Coffee, which I made a video at the end of 2019 calling it the best IPO of 2019. And from my research in that video, I was so impressed by their sales numbers and their increase in revenue over time that I even considered selling my shares of Starbucks and investing in a Luckin Coffee because I thought it was so undervalued based off of the revenue that they were bringing in. But then we found out that the company had inflated their sales numbers by around $300 million. So I don't feel as bad about being very bullish on Luckin Coffee because based off the numbers that they had reported, it looked very impressive. So based off of that, the fraud on the sales numbers, they were eventually delisted after the stock plummeted, and they were forced to pay a hefty fine to the SEC. And after that happened, I really changed my opinion on Chinese stocks because at that point, I hadn't really seen anything super negative about Chinese stocks that would make me hesitant to buy in overall. And so after what we saw with Luckin Coffee at that point, the only companies that I would consider investing in when it came to Chinese stocks were the giants that I had faith that since they were so large, it'd be very difficult for them to hide or fudge the numbers. And so the companies that I would consider investing in towards the middle half of 2020 were companies like JD.com, Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent because they were just so large. And then in November, we've had a really interesting back and forth between Trump and China. This has been pretty much the story of his entire presidency. It's been a lot of focusing on American jobs and the push and pull relationship between the Chinese government and Trump. And in December, Trump announced that he was going to be signing a bill that would potentially remove some Chinese stocks from the U.S. stock market if they didn't allow for more transparency and allow U.S. Financial firms to go in and look at their actual numbers. And while this bill definitely applies to all of international companies, it is 100% focused on the Chinese companies because of what we've seen in the past. Another thing that was included in that bill is it requires these Chinese companies to disclose who owns the company, and more specifically, if it's owned by the Chinese government. So while that does seem kind of scary that it could remove a bunch of Chinese stocks, it takes 3 years of non-compliance for them to be considered to be removed. So I don't consider this to be a huge red flag. Also, companies like NIO have come out and said that they're already compliant with the law, so they don't really have anything to worry about. And the New York Stock Exchange has gone back and forth a lot recently, just in this past week, on what they're going to be doing with some Chinese telecom companies. On Monday, they said that 3 stocks would remain listed, and they said that even though the current presidential administration wants them removed, they were going to hold their own and keep them on the stock exchange. And then on Wednesday, they reversed this decision just 2 days later and decided it was going to be delisting China Telecom, ticker symbol CHA, China Unicom, ticker symbol CHU, and China Mobile, ticker symbol CHL. And so this has been really interesting how quickly the New York Stock Exchange has kind of reversed the trajectory that they're going with these Chinese stocks. And then you have some more stuff coming out of China when it comes to the stocks. And the most interesting stuff has come with Alibaba and their founder, Jack Ma. Recently, Jack Ma has been very critical of the government, and this came after the Chinese government halted the IPO of a spin-off of Alibaba, which is going to be called Ant, which is a fintech company. And they wanted to have more transparency on the information that Ant had. And as a result of that, the president personally stopped the IPO of Ant, and then Jack Ma was kind of critical about some of the restrictions that were put in place for this IPO. And the Chinese government does not like it when you talk badly about their government. As a result, they started investigating Alibaba for antitrust allegations, which is very interesting because never in my lifetime I thought that the Chinese government would be doing antitrust allegations against one of its largest companies, because it's China. They don't really care, from what I've seen. We have antitrust allegations all the time when it comes to the big tech companies. You currently have stuff like Facebook, Google, Apple in the middle of these allegations, but seeing a Chinese company being investigated by the Chinese government was very strange, and it's definitely because the Chinese government is going after Jack Ma for his negative comments about the government. And what's even stranger is that Jack Ma hasn't been seen in public since October, and as a result of the fact that he was considered missing, the stock price plummeted. It was like 5% at one point. After it was found out that he had been replaced on a TV show that he was creating as being a judge on that show. But then a couple days later, it was reported that he was lying low, and I absolutely do not buy it at all. It caused the stock price to go up a little bit because it's some more positive news. It's not that he's found dead or completely missing, but lying low definitely seems like the Chinese government is maybe holding him on house arrest or something. So it's very interesting. So now I want to talk about my current stance on Chinese stocks, because it has changed a lot in the past month with the Luckin Coffee stuff, some of the laws that were put in place at the end of December, and now with the Alibaba situation. So there are some people that are very bullish on Chinese stocks, and I 100% understand why. There are some very interesting companies, specifically NIO, that has gotten a lot of attention from the younger generation. When you look at the Chinese stocks and compare them to the US stocks, they have been outperforming the US market for a while, and it's very impressive to see some of the returns that some of the giant companies have seen. But based off of what we've seen recently with the Chinese government, I'm going to be staying away from Chinese stocks until further notice. And so I want to compare my stance on these Chinese companies to what I've been doing and what I've said publicly about some of the US stocks. And in the past, I have always said that I like buying stocks after some negative news or something bad happens with a company. But I always put in the caveat that it has to be something that was direct fault of the company, or it's something that they can fix directly. And so this has been something that I've talked about with Lyft and Uber. I talked about how there was this legislation going through that would require Lyft and Uber to classify their drivers as being workers and not contractors. And that was a legislation that would cripple these companies and make it so much more difficult for them to become profitable. And when I compare that to when I've been very bullish on Twitter in the past, they had some horrible news where they had an ad bug that resulted in their revenue dropping like 50%. But that was something that was at fault of the company, and I trusted the ownership group and the business itself to recover. When you look at the Lyft and Uber situation, it was so out of their control because it's the US government versus them, not something that they can fix on their own. And so when I look at these Chinese stocks, the hindrance and the problems that we've been seeing with the government, and then the fight against the US government, which has put their future kind of in limbo, it just is too much risk for me. I like to invest in companies that are going to be doing well in the future. And if there is a outside force that they really can't control that's going to get in the way of that, I think that's too much risk for me. I was very bullish on these companies until this recent Alibaba news that has shown that the Chinese government will go after pretty much any company. And so if the Chinese government can crush a company the size of Alibaba, I really don't feel comfortable with any of them. That being said, I don't want to just end the video right here because I know that there are a lot of people that don't feel the same way that I do about these Chinese companies. So I am going to rank the Chinese stocks and how I like them. And so even though I'm not going to be buying in, I do have my own opinions on them. So I'm going to be ranking them that if I was going to be buying Chinese stocks, which one I would be buying. So number one, I am going to go with NIO, ticker symbol NIO. It's been really tough to argue that there's been a more impressive stock out there in the past year. It's gone up like 1,000% in the past year, and it's just been so impressive. And their increase in deliveries and the fact that their battery pack service model is so attractive to me, and I think it's going to be something that Tesla is going to be implementing pretty soon. They do have competition with Tesla trying to go into the European and Asian markets, but as of right now, NIO has seen explosive growth, and it's very exciting to see where they're going to go in the future. Number two, I will go with JD.com, ticker symbol JD. Just a couple months ago, this number two spot definitely would have gone to Alibaba. JD is Alibaba's biggest competitor, and they run a slightly different business. Some interesting numbers that I found is that JD.com has more warehouses than Amazon, and they're very impressive with what they do with e-commerce. And this is a different option if you are kind of a little bit more afraid about the Alibaba situation. And I do really love JD, and I've been very bullish on them for over a year at this point. Number 3, I will go with Alibaba, ticker symbol BABA. While the news has been kind of spooky, the resilience that the stock price has seen makes me feel pretty confident with them going forward. You definitely could argue that the stock is at a discount because of the recent news, but the fight against the Chinese government is going to be pretty scary going forward. But just because they're going against the government, their business is so strong and their numbers have been so impressive that I do think it could be an interesting investment going forward, but it's just too much risk for me at this point. Number 4, I'll go with Baidu, which is ticker symbol BIDU, which is an internet and AI company. This is a stock that not a lot of people know about, but I think it's been pretty impressive in the past. The most interesting fact that I found about them is that they currently have 76% of the market share when it comes to search engines in China. They're starting to include a bunch of features that would increase their revenue over time with their search engine. And so I think it's an interesting company. A lot of people don't know about it, and it is definitely a little bit riskier than some of the other companies, but I do think it's pretty interesting. And then realistically, those are probably the only 4 Chinese companies I would consider buying. There are some really interesting ones with EV companies, with Li Auto, ticker symbol LI, and XPeng, ticker symbol XPEV. They're super interesting and they've had explosive growth, but they don't have the delivery and the sales numbers like NIO to make me feel confident enough to buy into them, but they are definitely going to be something I'm going to watch going forward. I just wouldn't consider buying them just because they're too small and I haven't seen these cars in action. So as of right now, these are my opinions on the Chinese stocks. Just for a reminder, I would rank NIO, then JD, Alibaba, Baidu, and then kind of under the threshold of stocks I'd be willing to buy are going to be Li Auto and XPeng. So I'm very curious to see what your guys' stance on Chinese stocks are, because there has been a lot of news recently that has changed my opinions of them over time. I used to be very bullish on them. Luckin Coffee was one of my favorite stocks towards the end of 2019, but we have seen some of the problems with investing in Chinese stocks. So there is definitely a lot more risk, but there's been a lot of upside, and some of these stocks like NIO have outperformed the overall market by a significant margin. So I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say about these Chinese stocks. I will be back next week to continue talking about the stock market, and be sure to leave any suggestions for topics or stocks you guys would like me to cover in a future video in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching. I appreciate all the support, and I will see you next week.